Alan, welcome to Bloomberg Green.
Thank you very much for having me. Well, actually, I should say thank you for coming to my hometown of Glasgow.
Oh, and you told me that there were fights you had in this club?
Well, you know, I've been pleased to see the indigenous people represented throughout COP, and it's nice to be one of the indigenous people of Glasgow. Although some of the stories from my childhood probably best not told.
Well, so just a little bit of a background before we start off. Alan heads Unilever, and Unilever is, of course, a giant company with a global footprint. It also ranks on the GlobeScan sustainability ranking, #1 for 11 years running. How Unilever has done that is a question that can be answered in many ways, but what do you think has been the key to Unilever's success, and why aren't others catching up?
I would say it's in our DNA. Sustainability and trying to do business in a way that has a positive impact for society and the planet goes all the way back to one of our founders, in fact, many of our founders 100 years ago. My predecessor did a fantastic job of resurrecting that DNA and putting it at the center of our business model. And I must say, we don't define success as topping these rankings at all. It's an outcome of other objectives that we have. And specifically, we believe that putting sustainability at the heart of our company will derive better performance for all of our stakeholders, including, by the way, our shareholders. So it's an outcome, not an objective.
But there's usually an upfront cost. So let's talk through perhaps some examples of the difficulty of being able to cut emissions from a global supply chain. Palm oil is a very good example. Many people probably have heard of palm oil as an ingredient, but haven't realized that they've probably had palm oil this morning in breakfast or in makeup products that have been used. But it's also, it's a very key ingredient, but has a huge impact on deforestation, mostly in Indonesia, but there are other parts. What has Unilever done to be able to address that problem?
Yeah. Well, you started the question about what about the costs of sustainability and then moved into palm oil. Let me deal with both those. We strongly believe that sustainable business has got a powerful business case around growth, around reducing cost, not adding cost, around reducing risk and attracting talent. And we think we've saved about 1.2 billion euros of cost, mainly through avoided energy costs through our commitment to sustainability. Now,
that's 1.2 billion euros over what period?
Over about 10 years, and accelerating, largely because we made an early commitment to going into renewable electricity. So all the electricity we use is now from sustainable sources. Now, palm oil is an interesting material. It is certainly true that there have been horrific examples of deforestation due to the creation of palm plantations. But palm is also a very efficient material, and were we to somehow or other demonize palm oil and say get rid of it, it would cause even more catastrophic effects because the yield from palm oil is about 8 times greater than from equivalent products like soy or rapeseed oil. The key thing now is to make sure there's no more deforestation from palm oil. There's plenty of acreage under cultivation for palm now. And what we're preoccupied with trying to do is make sure that the palm that Unilever sources now is sustainable. That the smallholders and the concessions that we're sourcing from are not engaging in incremental deforestation, are using the minimum required amount of pesticides and fertilizers, are respecting human rights in their operations. If you take deforestation specifically, I think the only answer we've concluded is technology. We're now at about 98% of our palm is from certifiably sustainably sourced locations, and we audit at scale. But if you're in a palm concession on a Wednesday and everything's tickety-boo, there's no human rights abuses, there's no deforestation, who knows on the Thursday what happens when the auditors have left the facility. So we're in a partnership with Google Earth and massive real-time satellite-based mapping, coupled with, interestingly, tracking of the cell phones on the truck drivers who go to pick up the palm fruit, coupled with some artificial intelligence. And basically what you put the three together and you see if there's a piece of deforestation happening that you can see on the real-time maps, and you can track where the trucks have been to pick up, and you map that, then we can now start to eliminate or work with anyone who's engaged in deforestation.
Right. You talked about risks of climate change. Now, we are, for a long time, the conversation around climate change has been, it's going to affect us in the future, and it'll get bad and very bad very quickly.
Yeah.
But it's in the future. Are you starting to see those impacts on your company in any way?
We've talked about this, and I know it was, in a way, a surprise to you how climate change is not a sometime in the future thing for Unilever. It's a here and now thing. It impacts every single quarterly result that we post. Let me give you some examples. Well, let's start with the general principle, which is a world that's on fire or underwater is not a great place for us to be doing business. We're a very physical company. We lost a lot of sales when the west coast of the United States was on fire last year. In fact, one of the founders of one of our brands, Kate Somerville, it's a makeup brand, a skincare brand, Kate lost her home. Her home was burned down in the forest fires in western United States. Or flooding in China or Europe was very disruptive to the flow of materials that we use. But the easiest example for people to get their heads around is, you'll have noticed that this year was an unusually cold and wet year in continental Europe. If you're in #1 ice cream business in the world, and people are not out in the piazzas of Rome enjoying the sunny weather, it has a very immediate effect on sales. So whether it's demand being suppressed or supply chain disruption, every quarter we see some impact from climate change.
We're here at COP, which is mostly about countries meeting together, saying what they're going to do and who's going to pay for what. What's the role of business? And you spent a week now here. What is it that Unilever does, but just generally business community do to help or hinder the progress at COP?
I don't think we hinder too much, but thanks for framing the question that way. So we think that there are three sort of existential challenges in the world: climate change, the loss and destruction of nature, and growing inequality. And none of these are good for our business and are all very difficult to solve. So I've been delighted to see the representation of business here in Glasgow. I mean, the number of major financial institutions, banks, companies whose CEOs are present with decent-sized teams doing some hard work. I think it's a positive sign, and let me just explain very simply why. We've discovered this ambition loop between the private sector and government where when business steps up and makes ambitious commitments and shows action, we've found it emboldens government to reach harder on their NDCs, and vice versa. When we know that the government is committed to decarbonising and putting in place the policies to decarbonise, it emboldens us to reach higher. So I think there's a virtuous cycle between business and government, but that's only two of many stakeholders.
Right.
Civil society and NGOs play a critical role. I think it's great that the youngsters are out there calling on the grown-ups to do better. And academia is very important as well, because invention and innovation will be so central to studying and improving the situation.
Well, you say you help, okay, agreed, but businesses can also do that in reverse. So Unilever might rank up here on sustainability rankings, but there is a lot of lobbying that happens from businesses in many parts of the world. America is probably the clearest example of it, where they do try to run the ambition loop in reverse.
Yeah.
How is it that you can try and address? I mean, because that's going to affect your business, as you're saying. If climate is not acted upon, that's going to have an impact on your business. So what is it that you do to push the quote-unquote bad actors?
So I was just going to use that term. So let me not be naive. I think there are good and bad actors in the business community. Frankly, in any community, there'll be good and bad actors. Let me give a short answer, which is we have engaged every trade association that we're involved with. We've analyzed their lobbying position, and any that we think run contrary to our interests and our ambitions around climate change, then we will withdraw. We will not fund industry associations that are associated with bad lobbying. The slightly longer answer, if you want it,
sure.
Is we have a model of change that we use, whether it's tackling gender issues and equality, working on nature or climate change, which we start with our own operations. And we've reduced the carbon footprint of Unilever's operations by 74% since 2008. We're all green electricity, and we've got really good programs. Then we look at our value chain, so our suppliers and our distributors, and we now are working with 56,000 suppliers, but 300 of those suppliers generate 80% of our Scope 3 upstream emissions. And we're going to work with those 300 suppliers, and we're going to preferentially buy from those that are taking action on climate change. So our own operations, our value chain. Then the third is our brands. Actually, our brands are our most powerful lever of influence. And then the final layer is advocacy and lobbying and partnerships and getting involved with government. And we do deal with it in that order. It's not entirely sequential, but it's prioritized. It's hypocritical to be lobbying if you haven't got your own house in order first.
Right. Now, you brought up Scope 3 because that was going to be a follow-up question. You don't have an absolute net zero goal in the sense that you don't cover all Scope 3 emissions. Of course, you talked about your own operations, which are typically 5% of your emissions, less than 5%?
About that, yeah.
The 95% is Scope 3, of which supply chain emissions you talked about. So your suppliers consuming fossil fuels to be able to produce goods for you. But there's a whole other set that you are not addressing, which is what happens to emissions that are attached to the customer's use of your products.
Yeah.
Why haven't you put that in the goal, and what are you going to do about that?
Yeah, so let me explain a little bit what you mean. So by far the single biggest source of emissions in Unilever's end-to-end value chain is the energy that is used to heat the water to wash your clothes, wash your hair, wash your skin, cook your food. And that is the bit that you're talking about. So we do have a goal for that. So we've said that by 2030, we will have the emissions end-to-end, including full scope consumer use of all of our brands. That's quite an ambitious goal.
Right.
The accounting standard for Scope 3 emissions does not include those. So when we say by 2039, we will be net zero, it excludes that per the accounting standard. However, the only way we can get there is by decarbonizing the grid. I mean, at the end of the day, we've tried to get people to wash in cold water, take shorter showers. My own favorite, shower with a friend, but we can't even get people to do that. And so yes, we can innovate. We can get laundry products that wash at colder temperatures. It's very hard on personal care to get people to wash with cold water. So in the end, what we require is, or what will work is decarbonization of the grid, and we will continue to lobby for that. In the meantime, we've set a goal of having the full end-to-end Scope 3 emissions by 2030. It's quite a challenge.
Right. No, and I appreciate. I mean, the accounting standards have been. There are rooms to be flexible around those accounting standards, but eventually, I feel like there is a public reputation that is attached because. Customer use may not be included in your Scope 3 per the accounting standards, but look at fossil fuel companies and their customer use is definitely in their Scope 3. And so if they're going to try and address it, then there'll be demand for demand on you eventually to try and get to net zero. 50% is a good start. That's what science says we need by 2030, but I think eventually you're going to need.
I think you're probably right. You know, we wrote our climate transition action plan, And we were the first company in the world to voluntarily put that to a shareholder vote. So our board was quite anxious about doing this because we thought that there might be a substantial group of shareholders who said you're not going far enough, or a substantial group of shareholders who didn't buy the business case and said, why would we vote for decarbonizing Unilever? So we wrote the plan and put it up to our shareholders for support. And 99.6% of our shareholders approved this climate transition plan. And the only real business case was one day there will be a price on carbon. There has to be. And having less carbon in our end-to-end operations must give us competitive advantage. But we also said that every 3 years we'll update the plan. So we'll report every year, but every 3 years we'll brush up the plan. And when we look at it in 3 years' time, I will certainly have your words ringing in my ears that it's not good enough not to include full end-to-end Scope 3 emissions. But we are where we are.
Now, I poked holes in your plan. There is a really good thing about your plan, which is you don't have a role for offsets, at least inclusive of the Scope 3 until supply chain. Now, tell us why that's the case, and have you talked to other business leaders who rely on offsets?
Yeah. Well, as I said, we've managed to take 74% of the emissions out of our operations, and that is authentically taking them, just being a less carbon intense supply chain. And we think there's miles still to go in that. There will come a point where there'll be that last hard to eliminate set of emissions where I think we will need some kind of high quality, verified, heavily audited offsets. But we believe first we need to get rid of the physical carbon footprint. And many companies come and ask us for advice. Sounds a little arrogant, but for input, including, I hope they wouldn't mind me saying it, but BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, their number 2 guy has been and visited us twice now, and he just wants to understand how do you go about decarbonizing your business. And that's an instance where, for example, we'll be very clear saying offsets are not good enough. Offsets should be the last thing that you turn to, not the first thing that you turn to.
But in the process of getting to that point, right, offsets are, the panel heard earlier, it's a market that's growing exponentially.
Yep.
Are there steps you're taking to try and improve the quality of offsets? Because eventually you'll have to use them.
Yeah.
Or are you just waiting because it's going to be a decade out and that work will start to happen any which way?
Yeah. I think the model example we have right now is LEAF. So lowering emissions by accelerating forest finance. And what it's trying to do is match demand and supply. Now, LEAF hate being described as an offsetting mechanism, but let me explain how it works. Companies that have got high quality carbon transition plans with goals that are aligned to 1.5 degrees SBTIs, you have to be a high quality company on the demand side who wants to invest in protecting forests. Then the jurisdictions, aka countries, also have to authentically commit to protecting identifiable tracts of land with a high level of verification and auditing. And what LEAF does is it matches high quality demand with high quality supply with, frankly, entry criteria on both sides. And I think that's a model for future offsetting markets where there will be quality standards for both the buyer and the seller.
Right. Now, you've been here a week in COP. What have been your highlights so far?
Well, first of all, it's nice to come home. I saw my sister, which was nice. A highlight for me is we believe that COP needs to deliver 3 things. Number 1, a higher level of ambition in NDCs, and reading that we're now kind of at about 1.7 degrees when that's a big improvement. So the NDCs that I hope are about to be agreed, I think that's a highlight. Really seeing nature-based solutions on the radar at scale is a highlight. And the third is finance and the growing commitment to a transfer of funds from affluent nations to less affluent nations. There certainly doesn't seem to be a shortage of capital to invest in this space. Another highlight was seeing the passion of Al Gore. Just talking to Al and seeing him lit up when I think he finally feels that some traction is within grasp. That was a personal highlight. And just to match the ledger, a low light is the lack of progress on a price on carbon. Yeah. You know, ultimately, the highest impact action that I think we can take is to get a price on carbon north of 50 euros or $50 a ton.
So now the politics of price on carbon are complicated, and different countries do it differently. You know, here in Europe, even as part of the EU, now not part of the EU, here in the UK, there is a price on carbon for certain sectors of the economy. But are there ways in which you can influence that price on carbon to actually come through?
Yeah, there certainly
everywhere?
Is. Let me give two, by ways of example. We were very active on the OECD work to get a minimum corporation tax of 15%. So if the global community, political community, can band together to establish a minimum corporation tax, surely we can align on putting a price in place on carbon. Right. Secondly, we can lead by our actions. So, you know, I talked about get our own house in order, then our value chain, then our brands, then our work on partnering and advocacy. Well, we have used an internal price on carbon. It's been fascinating. We originally put it in place to try and differentiate between different capital allocations. So we can build a new plant this way, or we could build a new plant that way. And we put a price on carbon and try and have that as a tipping. So it was 50 euros a ton. Right. So about where it needs to be, right. Building towards 100 euros a ton. Actually, it didn't really help us discriminate much between projects. But what it did do, it wasn't a notional tax, it was an actual tax. It's generated, I think, about 120 million euros that we've taxed our capital projects on and used to invest in innovative low-carbon technologies in our manufacturing and our distribution. So it's created an experimental fund for us. It's been fantastic.
Well, I mean, I think people now appreciate, but many companies, the companies of your size, are larger in economic terms than entire countries on the planet. And I'm not talking island nations, I'm talking the 50th largest economy now is you know, you're probably bigger than the 50th largest economy.
I doubt it, but sounds good.
Now we're coming to the close of our time, but just sticking with price on carbon, there is an implicit price on carbon with shareholders demanding companies to cut emissions, to do right by climate. How much has that happened to you as a company, even if you have high rankings? What are your conversations with your shareholders like? So
I'm still consider myself quite a rookie CEO. I've been in the job just over 2 years. But even in that 2.5-year period, the horrible expression ESG discussion with our investors has changed dramatically. So a couple of years ago, literally in investor meeting after investor meeting, there would be 5 minutes at the end where the portfolio manager would go, oh yeah, we're meant to leave 5 minutes to discuss ESG, and turn to a junior colleague in the room and say, you got any questions on ESG? That has really changed, and we'll now have entire 1-hour sessions with investors where the only discussion that they want to get into is what are you doing on carbon? What are you doing on human rights? What are you doing on your supply chain? How do you verify that your supply chain's not doing things that it should be doing? What do you do when you find it is? And so the nature of the conversation is changing, but is sustainability in your business fully priced into how the market thinks right now? 100%, definitely not. Right. So we're in the early waves, I think, of sustainability getting priced in, and we still have to make the business case. If we make the case that sustainable companies grow faster, have lower risk, reduce cost, and are a magnet for the best talent, then I think the market will start to price it in.
Now, you're leaving COP, and you're going to watch how things play out in this week from afar, is there one thing that you're looking out for?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose all of us at the end of the day want to make sure that the aggregate commitments of the countries represented here are in line with, or at least closer to, a 1.5 degree future. It will be catastrophic if that's not the case. So that, I think, is the headline outcome that none of us know yet where that's going to come out. Yeah. You were telling me the negotiations always overrun.
They do.
I hope they don't overrun for too long, because the tension's killing us.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Akshat.
And you know, we'll talk again. The work that Unilever does is always fascinating to me. You know, we didn't end up touching on things like carbon labeling, which is something.
Carbon labeling. We didn't touch on clean futures. We didn't touch on innovation and the role of innovation. So I'm happy to come back and bore you with some of that at some point.
Wonderful. Great. All right. Thank you very much.